It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Some new numbers out on our billionaire class. Evidently, globally, we've got 2,781 billionaires, and thank goodness we do, the most ever. So, hey, globally, number one, most billionaires ever. Congratulations. Also here in the U.S., 800 of those billionaires right here in our backyard. And again, number one, thank you, American workforce, for sacrificing wages and benefits and retirement security and vacations and time with your family. Thank you for that. Our billionaires are forever grateful. But here at home, our billionaires control about $5.8 trillion in wealth, which the statistic I saw, weird, is evidently 50% more wealth than 50% of the country. So the bottom half of the country has about $3.7 trillion worth of wealth. Our 800 billionaires, $5.8 trillion. Look, you can fit 800 people into a good-sized room. 65 million households. There's some unequal distribution here. There's a problem. But I guess the positive part of this is that idiotic nonsense that, you just work hard, play by the rules kind of thing, that's out the window. Because what we find out, the new billionaires, the billionaires under 30, not one of them have done it on their own. Not one of them pulled their self up by the bootstraps. Not one of them did work, invented something. No. All of the billionaires now under 30, the new ones, the newly minted billionaires, they got their money the old-fashioned way. They inherited it. Someone died and they cashed in, won the birth lottery. And look, good for them. But what this is quite frankly, this is congratulations, conservatives, congratulations, the anti-tax crusaders in the GOP and on the right, because, well, as a generation who's benefited from massive tax breaks that we gave out willingly, again, through lower wages, healthcare benefits, all that stuff, now they get to pass that wealth on to the next generation with virtually no tax burden whatsoever. And you go, mission accomplished, I guess? Should we take some joy in knowing that our sacrifice is being, I guess, recognized? I don't know about appreciated, but recognized, because we're number one. We've got the most billionaires of everywhere. And the fact that none of the global billionaires under 30 actually produced anything, I guess that you work hard, thing, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, I guess that's now out the window. Squeeze the quarter till the eagle screams, scrimp and save, and you'll be a billionaire too, kind of thing. Is this where we as working people go, yeah, chances of us being a billionaire, 0. And or 0 and a whole bunch of zeros after the decimal point, and then a whole bunch of zeros more, and then 1 well down the road. Now, look at March. March, we had a very good job report. 303,000 jobs created in the month of March. Solid. That would take us to somewhere over the last year, almost 3 million jobs created during the Biden year here so far. Unemployment ticked down to 3.8%. In fact, we have been under 4% for 26 consecutive months, about to break the record. We are one shy of the record that was set back in the 1960s for being under 4%. That is a good thing. Hourly wages up 4.1% over the same rate last year. So wages are ticking up. Maybe not keeping up with inflation as they should, but that's been decades in the making. Look, this is not new. This is Reagan firing the Patco workers, firing that shot across the boardroom, saying, hey, it's open season on those greedy unions and their demands for better wages. And look what it's done. All these years later, stagnant and declining wages. But good jobs report, happy jobs report. In the healthcare industry, they added 72,000 jobs. Good. But I guess, more of us are getting sick. Construction, we're seeing the investments that the Biden folks and the Democrats and a couple of Republicans threw in actually bearing fruit. 39,000 jobs there. People are going back to restaurants again. Those are firing back up. 31,500 jobs created. And that is a good thing. Government even. You're starting to see the roles increasing, especially on the local level, where 49,000 of these 71,000 government jobs were brought back. And that's a good thing. Look, services are coming back. The idea that maybe we can fix neighborhoods and actually do something. Sadly, manufacturing has been flat, but the auto industry did add 6,500 jobs. That's a good thing. Sadly, the share of people holding multiple jobs, that rose to 5.4%, still below the 90s peak. But every time I see this comment, this phrase of how many people are holding 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs, I can't help but think of George W. Bush during one of the town halls he did, where a woman stood up and said, I work 3 jobs, and she's about ready to tell the story of how difficult her life is and how she can't make it on 1 or 2 jobs. She needs 3 to be able to put food on the table, a roof over the head, medicine in her cabinet. And he cuts her right off, goes, wow, uniquely American. Good for you. Good for you working 3 jobs just to exist. And I'll tell you, nothing really hammers that point home more than that statement. And that's been the Republican position for a while. Good on you. You go out there and you work. You work, because someday you might be a billionaire if you just work hard enough. And you go, I think we're missing the point here. The folks having multiple jobs, working more hours. In fact, the number of hours worked by Americans ticked up a bit as well in the month of March, meaning we're working harder, making a little bit more, but sadly still falling behind. And this is where I come back to the game seems already rigged for most Americans, and sadly so. That work hard, play by the rules, get ahead thing, I firmly believe in and I want. And you should too. But I look at, November, and I look at the guys who are running for president. One guy says, hey, rich people need to pay taxes. We want workers to join and form unions. We want the share of the economy that workers create, the wealth that they create, to go some of that to them. And the other guy, Donald Trump, over the weekend at what he claims is a $50 million fundraiser full of billionaires and rich people lining his pockets, he promised them that he wasn't going to raise their taxes and they would be just fine. Got to keep those taxes low for you folks. The hoarders, the greed monsters, the ones who are going to pass on to your children trillions of dollars in wealth. And that's going to happen. And, you go back to the first person who paid the estate tax, John D. Rockefeller, was the first person who, by any measure, was a billionaire of his time. He was the richest guy probably almost ever. He paid a 70% estate tax. When he passed, 70%. And what's interesting is you still have rich Rockefellers today. They did okay. But now what do we have? Well, we've got crumbling infrastructure, sadly, because we're not investing enough. But good on Biden for what we got. We need to triple what we got, and we need more. The money that we're reshoring factories with, the education system, the healthcare, all of these things that we need to address, we're giving away to our very well-to-do, so that we can have the bragging rights to say, "Hey, we've got the most billionaires." So, do you take great pride in knowing that we here in the great U.S. of A., where we just doubled the child poverty rates, where you have veterans sleeping in the streets, where homelessness is still a problem, but we've got billionaires, and we've got lots of them. In fact, so many of them, 800, that they have so much wealth 50% more than half of this country. I guess good on us. Hooray for us. Is that what we should be doing? Now, look, I think it's a good jobs report. This administration has been doing everything it can do to clean up from Trump's pandemic mess. We're heading in the right direction. But the folks on the other side still whining, recession's coming, the sky's falling. Don't buy it. When we come back, going to talk about the latest attempt by big money to destroy your ability to get better wages, hours, conditions. Quick break. Right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So every day we're seeing stories of workers fighting to organize and achieve union representation on the job, demanding better wages, hours, working conditions, especially coming out of the pandemic. Not surprising. We were told we were frontline heroes, we're essential. You remember. And workers have internalized it. And you know what? They would like to make better wages. So as workers are organizing, corporate America, not thrilled that the pendulum is swinging just a little bit back in the direction of maybe having to share some of those profits, which is why corporate America decided, hey, maybe there's a new tact here. Maybe we can go after the very law that gives workers those little bit of rights to help them organize, the National Labor Relations Act, which has been decided law since 1935, 89 years. And, well, you've got companies like SpaceX, Amazon, Starbucks, Trader Joe's all going, hey, how can we get this in front of the Supreme Court? The one that threw out Janus, overturned Roe, the one where John Roberts was going to be the guy who called balls and strikes. How can they get that there? And here to share some thoughts on, what it would look like if they were successful in making the 89-year-old law unconstitutional. That's why I've asked Tom Spiggle to come talk with us. He's an employment lawyer and host of the Spiggle Law Firm podcast. You can find that wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Tom, thanks for taking time for us.
I'm happy to be here, Rick. Great topic.
So this very predictable. I mean, you can't intimidate people much anymore. The captive audience meetings seem to be going away. People are standing up for themselves. People have internalized that whole hero thing. Now corporate America's got to find a new way to put workers down and crush their rights to organize. This seems very predictable to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has been a long-standing tactic of corporate America to try to fight any kind of regulatory apparatus. And, one of their favorites is to fight back against agencies like the SEC and now the National Labor Relations Board. So this is a very common tactic in their playbook.
But, here's the thing. I remember John Roberts, and then we're going to talk about the Supreme Court for a second, because I remember John Roberts' confirmation. He's going to call balls and strikes. Decided law was decided law, and this court has been willing to just tear up decided law and make new law out of whole cloth. Do you see this as a possibility that they could overturn an 89-year-old law?
It's hard to predict, as you point out, what this particular Supreme Court will do given the new makeup of it. I think this is a bit of a long shot, but you never know. I mean, this is again kind of a tried and true tactic where they come through Texas, right? They filed the lawsuit in Texas. They want to get to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has a pronounced rightward tilt, and then get that before the Supreme Court. And we've had a number of we've seen that path already. Certainly, with the abortion drug, we've recently have oral arguments on that. We'll see what the Supreme Court does with that objective. So I don't know. If I were a betting man, I'd say the Supreme Court will not overturn this, but I've been surprised before.
I'm there with you, but here's the thing. I think most people have no idea what the NLRA is. Most union people don't, unfortunately, know what the NLRB does. Obviously, the act and the board very different. Should be an education process for working people to understand that this could be taken away. And you may be right. The court may not do it this time or go this far or any of that. But I think this is an education opportunity to explain exactly what the NLRA is and what the board part of the NLRA does. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the National Labor Relations Act from 1935 is sort of the premier federal legislation that protects union rights, not only union rights, but just worker rights generally throughout the United States. So you're talking about calling balls and strikes. The NLRB is supposed to be doing that, and generally they do. With regard to union activity, because as you well know, corporate America is very good at union busting and trying to prevent people from performing unions. And the NLRB will often come in under using the National Labor Relations Act and say, sorry, they've got to have, a fair right to vote. They've got to have a fair right to assemble. I mean, they were really in the weeds on the rights to form unions, and then not only the right to form unions, but how unions function after that. And for those of us who are not in unions, the National Labor Relations Board still has a very powerful influence on our workplace because they can govern the right to engage in what we call concerted activity. So whether that's union activity or just standing up for your rights outside of a union, the National Labor Relations Act protects those. So it would be illegal to fire you, let's say, for standing up and saying, hey, there are unsafe working conditions here. Or, hey, I think there's illegal pay practices happening in this organization. Those sorts of things are protected by the National Labor Relations Act through the National Labor Relations Board. So it really has a long-reaching impact for all of us in the workplace.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I think the education process is very important because, again, most people don't know what it is. And the reason I think this is important is if it is taken away, something to be angry about because the history of the NLRA is kind of important. My view is it was a peace treaty to get my grandparents' generation from literally tearing this country apart because they were being so badly abused. But I'm curious your thought of the history.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you talk about what would happen if we got rid of the National Labor Relations Board, going back to what it was like before that was enacted, the practices were just horrendous, right? The worker abuse was open, it was flagrant, it was appalling, and so the National Labor Relations Board was really put in place to, as you say, to prevent people going to the streets with pitchforks, because that's where things were headed. And so the act has a long history of trying to maintain labor relations. Sometimes it's done better than others, but to maintain labor relations between management and employees, whether they're unionized or not.
So if Starbucks and SpaceX and Amazon and Trader Joe's, if they get their way and this is overturned, do you think that this is something that the American workers just take? Does it make them more militant? Do we see a much more activist, militant labor movement? Any thoughts on where this could potentially lead?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we could see much more activist, much more bare knuckles kinds of confrontations, maybe literally. Because without the National Labor Relations Board, I mean, it's going to be the Wild West. I mean, there are very few. I mean, there are some agencies, but there are no agencies that have that kind of direct role in regulating union activity and other concerted worker activities. So without that protection, which is what that lawsuit aims to do, right? If they are successful in getting this to the Supreme Court and getting it overturned, then that agency's gone. Now there could be an attempt to try to reconstitute it, but it's not going to look like what it looks like now.
No, and look, judging on what happens in Washington today, I have no faith that anything will replace it. So, to follow up on that, I get that, if the NLRA goes away or is unconstitutional for future workers organizing, I get, that would throw that completely into chaos. But what about people who've been in legacy contracts and have had unions there, like me, my entire work life?
Right. No, it's going to affect that too, right? Because if it's gone, then the regulatory agency that enforces those agreements, that enforces your ability to continue to participate in the union, not just like you said, not only for people in future, union organizing efforts, it would directly impact people today in the workplace. I mean, the very next day you would see changes, and it would endanger union ability to enforce, longstanding agreements.
Now, you as an employment lawyer, I'm sure you deal with a lot of people being fired and a lot of situations of at-will employment. For me, I tell people you join a union so that you have a contract, so you have due process, so that you don't get fired for no reason whatsoever. That's one thing. But wages, hours, conditions, all of that, very important. To have that go away would throw employment law in this country, I think, completely into chaos. So do you think that there's a way that they rule on this that could, just lessen it a little bit, where you still have all of this stuff in place, but they don't really have any power?
Yeah, they could. They could do some kind of creative ruling that would, as you point out, essentially gut the agency without getting rid of it completely, because what this lawsuit is aiming at is at the structure of the agency. They're claiming that it is unconstitutional in the way that the judges are appointed and then overseen. So, the court could say, well, the agency can remain, but, these judges under these conditions, don't have enforcement power or don't have significant enforcement power. So then you'd have an agency that was, on the books, but essentially toothless.
Now, in the bigger picture for me, and again, you're the lawyer here, I'm just a guy who reads a little bit. I keep saying that this court and a lot of the right wing of this country wants to move us back to the Lochner era, where if you were hungry enough and desperate enough to work in deplorable conditions for poverty wages, that was your liberty. It was your freedom. And I'm hearing those messages again. Now, only instead of liberty of contract, it's now freedom, because, evidently that's the buzzword that they use most often. Do you see that as part of this? Do you see the same thing I'm seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, that's been the longstanding, we want you workers to be free, right? Like a right to work state, right? We want you to be able to make your own choices. When what the real impact of that is it blunts workers' ability to act in a collective fashion. So absolutely, I think you're exactly right.
But looking at this, and I know I have a lot of friends who go, well, that couldn't happen here. Reality is one change of the law like this, potentially we're right back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s, and not the 1980s and 90s.
Yeah, I mean, we saw what happened to Roe, right? I mean, the court was willing to overturn, upend decades of longstanding precedent, including the court's own precedent. And we've seen the chaos that has caused on the state level. And so absolutely, with the stroke of a pen, I mean, this Supreme Court could, wipe the NLRB off the map. And then you're right, we are back to the Lochner era. We're back to workers having very few protections, except those that they extract with extreme pain, both to themselves and to the economy at large.
So the last line of questioning I've got for you, because I want to hammer on the fact that this is an important law that I don't think most working people know even exists. And I believe we should be defending this at every opportunity and strengthening. Look, over the last 89 years, there's been an ossification process where our rights have been diminished slowly over time. I would like to see, something like the PRO Act passed. I'd like to see Taft-Hartley overturned. I'd like to see a lot of things. But at least holding on to the little bit that we have is, I think, important as a starting point. Or do you think just chucking the whole thing and potentially starting over?
And you starting over in a way that's beneficial to workers?
Yeah, no, I mean, at the end of the day, if they get what they want, I had a union buddy of mine tell me, well, this would be a good thing. It'd make people wake up and start fighting for something. Kind of a libertarian view, I think.
Yeah.
But,
Well, we can certainly hope for that. I mean, I do think it would be a rude awakening to a lot of people, as you point out. I mean, not only people in unions, but people who are not in unions. Like right now, if you're at a workplace, you're protected if you go on Facebook and raise an issue about your workplace and working conditions and, discrimination and those sorts of important issues in the workplace. You're protected by the National Labor Relations Act. If that goes away, then again, it's the Wild West. You can't post that. I mean, you could, but you could be fired legally. You're not going to be able to have, a referee in there to help with unionizing efforts. I mean, it would be a rude awakening. A lot of people would notice, even if they're not aware of the law right now. I think you're right. Most people are not. They would become aware pretty quickly once that law is absent and corporate America is able to, behave as it wants to without restraint.
Let me follow up on that for a second, because you grab my attention. Posting something on social media can get you fired.
Sure.
In an environment where you don't have a contract and due process. If you're an at-will employee, you can be fired for, posting something on social media or no reason at all.
Yeah. I mean, you would still have some, protections of federal anti-discrimination law, but those, have their own limitations. And those laws don't impact, again, workers' rights to act collectively in any fashion in the workplace. So absolutely, if you post something on social media about your workplace conditions, that's protected. If you're a union or not, under the National Labor Relations Act, National Labor Relations Act goes away, then you can post that, and you're right. You can be legally fired, and we lose union rights. Like right now, right? If you're under most collective bargaining agreements, if some disciplinary action is proposed against you at work, you have a right to have a union rep with you. That doesn't exist for most employees. If you're not in a union, you can't. We get these calls all the time. You're not entitled in most instances to bring your lawyer. You're not entitled to any kind of representation if you're not in the union. So those important rights would go away, and there would be nothing to replace them unless there was another National Labor Relations Act. But there'd be nothing in other institutions or other federal agencies that would protect you in that way.
I mean, this could throw employment into chaos. The hope is this just gets thrown into the trash heap of history, but it's interesting that they're trying. Tom, I appreciate you sharing some thoughts, sharing your expertise. Hope folks will check out the podcast, the Tom Spiggle, the Spiggle Law Firm podcast. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that. Tom Spiggle, appreciate the time.
Great. Thanks for having me on, Rick.
I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think the Roberts Court, Mr. Balls and Strikes, do you think they go and overturn this? I got to tell you, that this court, scary stuff. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Right back.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So, we've been talking about the Heritage Foundation and their Project 2025 in combination with Donald Trump's want to use something called Schedule F. And there's a lot of stuff here, and we're going to get to it. But the idea, as I remember and as I've talked about, is Trump was going to use this Schedule F to fire anyone in the federal government who isn't sufficiently loyal. And the Heritage Foundation would properly vet sufficiently loyal folks to take those jobs, thus making patronage great again. Now, the Biden administration kind of threw a little wrench into that plan, as last week, the Office of Personnel Management, they have moved on a rule that's going to preempt this. And I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, and that's why I've asked Jackie Simon to come talk with us. She's the Director of Public Policy with the American Federation of Government Employees, AFGE, AFGE.org, the website if you want to take a look at their work. Jackie, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with what is this Schedule F that we doth hear of?
Well, I think that Schedule F, all we really know about Schedule F per se is the executive order that Donald Trump issued right at the very end of his first term. Let's hope it's his only term. And it never really got off the ground because it happened so late. It was in October, right before the election. And after the election, of course, the agencies didn't bother putting together their lists. But the kind of lists that they were supposed to put together were positions that were in any way connected to carrying out policy. And the only agency that actually compiled a list that was able to be, looked at by other people was the Office of Management and Budget, which of course is an arm of the White House. And if you use what they did as a guide, no surprise to anyone, they had a very expansive concept of being involved in policy, and it involved people who actually wrote regulations, but also the administrative assistant who might do the typing and document preparation, or somebody who might be copying documents, anybody who touched anything that was connected to policy. And
someone who took out the trash that the
Sure.
former policy papers were in.
Well, those are all contractors, but in any case, yes. And so that gives you a sense. So if that happens government-wide, which we have every reason to expect it will, these lists will be very expansive, and the number tens of thousands won't begin to capture the number of jobs that would be affected by this Schedule F. And the intention would be to switch these jobs over to Schedule F. They would no longer be competitive service jobs, they'd become Schedule F jobs. And once they became Schedule F jobs, as you just said, you become an at-will employee. You can be hired and fired at will for no reason or any reason. And we know, of course, the reason for firing is going to be not poor performance, but failure to adhere to the Trump agenda.
And failure to kiss up to dear leader. Heaven forbid you write something on social media that dear leader doesn't like. And this should scare everyone, even the red hats who support Trump, because this kind of authoritarian policy is bad for all working people.
Well, that's true. I can go two ways from here. I can talk about other things that are Schedule F adjacent and almost as bad as Schedule F that they're also going to do, or I can talk about this new regulation that the Biden administration just put out. Which direction?
Well,
you want to go?
tell me what Biden did, because as I understand, they've thwarted this for now. But if Trump becomes president, I have no faith that Trump is going to adhere to this policy, that they will eventually overturn it and go the way they want. So what am I missing here?
Well, you sort of you went to the end right away. So I think that it will certainly slow down the implementation of Schedule F. Got to make a distinction in the federal government, and really everywhere, between the status of a position and the status of the person that holds that position or wants to hold that position. And so what this Biden regulation does is protect people who are already in those positions. If you've already been hired through the competitive service and you have all the rights, the due process rights, the civil service rights that go along with a competitive service position, it says you can't take those away just unilaterally. You can't declare the incumbent of a new Schedule F position to be subject to all the rules and regulations that will go along with Schedule F. And as you pointed out, it will be challenged immediately. It'll be rescinded. But once they start actually firing people on these specious grounds, these political grounds or whatever, they won't even need it. Won't just be adherence to President Trump's policies. I mean, as bad as that is, I think that we should all prepare ourselves for people who aren't white, of the preferred religion, of the preferred gender, etc.
Clearly making
their employment threatened as well.
Right. I mean, this is patronage at its worst. But my fear is, and I've had this conversation a couple of times already, is that the Heritage Foundation is doing their due diligence in vetting people, and they've identified probably every position in our government that they want to put their loyalists into, who are going to be extremely competent. They're not going to be just, hey, Uncle Joe's got a nephew who needs a job. These are going to be people who are extremely competent, and their goal is going to be to destroy that agency, not to do the work of the people, but to do the work of corporate America, thus privatizing monetizing and profitizing our government.
Well, you may be right, but there are a few evil geniuses out there, people who really are competent and would know what they were doing, trying to dismantle an agency or a program and really create chaos and screw the whole thing up. In my experience, a lot of these people are idiots, and
So which is worse? Hold on, which is worse? The bumbling idiot who is the nephew of Uncle Bill, or the person who really knows what they want and has an axe to grind against that? Which person's worse?
Well, I think it depends on the context. A lot of people, thanked God on a daily basis that Trump was such a bumbling idiot and that he was incapable of running the government in any coherent way, or, that he was not really able to affect all the kinds of changes he wanted to affect. There's that. But then, there are agencies where, who's in a position is a life or death proposition.
Give me an example.
Certainly in healthcare, in working for example in FEMA, working in the prisons, working in Border Patrol, any kind of law enforcement. If you've got incompetence in some of these jobs, people could die. I mean, there's all kinds of, somebody who's in Consumer Product Safety Commission at the EPA, having to do with, trying to protect the air we breathe, the water we drink, etc. If you have incompetence in those kind of jobs, the consequences can be life or death, not just for a few people, but for millions of people. So, that part is scary. If they had truly incompetent people. Some of these, the politicals, I think it's really kind of a 50-50. I would say that from the last Trump administration. There were, like we said, evil geniuses who knew exactly what they wanted to do and were very effective at doing it. And there were others who were like, where am I? What's going on? They only got, and we found out later they got the job because they organized a rally or something. Yeah. And they were wholly incompetent.
No, but here's the thing, and this is where the difference, I think the difference in this time around is, I don't think the people, the moneyed people, the think tank world, I don't think all of those groups bought that Trump was going to win. I don't think they thought he was going to win. And I don't think they were sufficiently crazy enough yet. I think from 2015, 16 to now, I think the Heritage Foundation and all of the the State Policy Network think tanks and all of these places have gone completely off the deep end, and I think they want to seize this opportunity and are putting the billions of dollars in resources into taking this over.
All true, but maybe I'm just being Pollyanna-ish about this. Believe me, I'm expecting the worst if Trump wins. There's no question about it. Federal employees will be harmed. The administration will be absolutely focused on inflicting as much harm on federal employees as they possibly can. Across the board, economic harm and harm in terms of their rights, harm in terms of their ability to carry out their jobs, the missions of their agencies, harm in terms of national security, or even border security, every kind of security, clean air, clean water, safe food, you name it. Across the board, everything and everybody will be worse off. And the question is, will there be enough people who want a Trump administration political job on their resume, and are competent, who will want these kind of jobs? I mean, there are political appointments that are prestigious, and then there are these low-level jobs that aren't particularly prestigious, and the fallout, if all goes according to expectations, that the pendulum will swing at some point, America will wake up. That will be a stain on their resumes, on their career, on their lives. And so I think that a lot of people, competent people, intelligent people, might think twice about taking one of these jobs.
So again, it comes back to the question I asked a minute ago, which is worse, the competent, people who have an axe to grind, who are going to go in there and do the devil's work, or the totally bumbling incompetent who is going to, screw everything up, and thus ultimately the kind of the same result where government is broken and corporations rule the day.
Well, the smart ones are more dangerous in policy rules, that's for sure. In carrying out the policy, that's a toss-up. It's going to be a nightmare. Let's just. Yeah. I hate thinking about it, but everybody wants to talk about Schedule F. But we got to really work to make sure that never happens.
And that's it. So as you're talking to your members, clearly this has got to be something that weighs on their minds, because, I know a lot of federal employees, and the one thing they talk about is, they have some bit of security. They're not at-will employees. The only way they can be fired is through due process. So now throwing this at-will kind of scenario in there, are you getting any responses from people?
Well, that's a good segue into the other subject I wanted to talk about, and that is, although there's a lot of focus on Schedule F, it's the rest of the civil service that is really in danger of being dismantled and harmed in a Trump administration. And unfortunately, there are a lot of Democratic lawmakers who go along with some of these ideas. And that is to relax or reform, or whatever word they want to use, the competitive service. They want to make it easier to hire and easier to fire all federal employees. And their favorite way to describe the civil service system is to call it broken, and we need to fix it. It's broken. The hiring system's broken. It's too hard to fire a federal employee. And so you've got all these people who, you've got these sort of bipartisan groups that'll come together and say, here we have a bipartisan proposal for civil service reform. And what they all are weakening these civil service protections that you just talked about, that provide a certain amount of due process. If somebody, is accused of misconduct or poor performance or something like that, you get to go to a third party, a neutral third party, and management has to show its evidence, and the worker has his or her evidence, and a neutral will decide whether or not there's enough evidence to justify whatever it is that management wants to do, fire you, discipline you, etc.
Right.
That's what they want to not 100% get rid of, but weaken to the point that workers will not be able to exercise the very, very weak rights that they'll have when this is all said and done. The other thing they want to do is completely rewrite the pay system. And that's as dangerous as anything having to do with Schedule F, because not only will they want to decide who gets a pay raise and how big the pay raise is, but also in Project 2025, one of the worst sentences in the whole thing for federal employees, one of the things that you've been talking about is that they will elevate performance as a factor or criterion for whether you keep your job, whether you get a pay raise, whether you get a promotion, all those kinds of things. And they are very explicit that carrying out the political agenda of the president will be an important element in your performance evaluation. So that politicizes every job in the entire federal government, not just Schedule F, not just the higher level policy making, but every job. And then that combined with these weakened appeal rights. And of course, they have no trouble abrogating the collective bargaining agreement. They toss that in the trash can and say, we're not real interested in that. And so even outside of the collective bargaining agreement, those appeal rights will be almost impossible for workers to access and use. So it's the whole enchilada. Yeah. It's not just the policy-making jobs. It's the whole federal civil service.
So it's even worse than I've been saying it is. It's this and then a whole lot more, which again is why I'm hoping come November that we don't have to think about this, and the person who's pushing this kind of making patronage great agenda, maybe we don't put him back into office. So last question I've got for you, outside of obviously voting a particular way in November. What can people do to let elected leaders know that, hey, we value our public servants, we value our government employees. Maybe we should, I don't know, treat them better.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when people who aren't federal employees talk to lawmakers or politicians who'd like to become a lawmaker, I think that, obviously they've got their own issues too, but everybody has skin in the game of an effective government. Yeah. Everybody's breathing the same air. Everybody's drinking the same water. Everybody is buying the same products at the store. We want safe food. We want safe products. We want an effective national defense. And so the people who provide all of that really should be insulated from politics.
I'm right there with you. Jackie Simon, I appreciate you taking some time for us, filling us in on the facts. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank
you. Jackie Simon, AFGE Director of Public Policy. Check out their website, afge.org. Look, I've said this a million times. I don't want politics in our governance. I want boring bureaucrats doing the jobs that they're trained and spent their lives working towards. I want the best people in those jobs. I want them to have security rights. But the reality is you can fire a federal employee. You just got to do it the right way. Just like you can throw somebody in jail. You just got to do it the right way. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day that Minneapolis Teachers Union Local 59 went out on strike. They took the vote to strike despite the fact that state law prohibited teachers from striking. But after months of negotiations that went nowhere, the teachers decided it was time to act. The main issue for the strike was wages. One teacher, George Kimball, recalled why he had supported the strike, stating, "The wages were so low. I had 5 children at the time, and we could barely survive. We couldn't take it anymore." The strike lasted 14 days. The teachers did not win the gains they hoped for with their work action, but their strike drew public attention to the lack of bargaining rights for public sector workers. The next year, Minnesota Governor Wendell Anderson signed into law the Public Employees Labor Relations Act. This act granted public sector workers the right to collective bargaining. The Minneapolis teachers' strike played a key role in Minnesota's public sector workers gaining the fundamental right of union representation. The 1960s and 70s saw a wave of teacher strikes across the nation as educators stood up for themselves as workers. Across the country, there were more than 1,000 teacher strikes between 1960 and 1974. More than 750,000 teachers walked out of the classroom and onto the picket lines. By the end of the 1970s, more than 70% of public school teachers were covered by collective bargaining agreements. For teachers concerned about class size, pensions, wages, school safety, and the quality of education, the strike remains an important way to build solidarity and to show the power of our nation's educators.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, ALEC is back. Yep, the American Legislative Exchange Council. In case you don't know, they are a corporate shill group. Their job to heavily lobby Congress, to heavily lobby state legislators, to get them to pass bad anti-worker, pro-corporate legislation. They do a really great job of whining and dining and doing your local legislators' work, possibly. I love finding those model bills that ALEC puts out, especially here in Pennsylvania, where I found a couple of them, where you could put their model legislation and your legislator's bill next to each other, and they're eerily familiar. Some would argue identical. In fact, there was that case in Florida where I think it was a woman legislator. Doesn't matter, but I think there was this woman put in a piece of legislation with Alex's name still on it. Didn't even bother to put her name on it, which I guess honest, I give her credit, maybe. But they're back, and there's more model legislation that could be banging around state houses in your neck of the woods. As labor has seen an uptick in support, as the American public is going, hey, something's not quite right. We've got all these billionaires. There's all this wealth. We're the wealthiest country in the history of civilization at its wealthiest moment. And yet, I'm still struggling. We still have hungry children. We've got homeless vets. We've got crumbling cities. We got work to do. How is it that this happens? Well, again, I go back to my high school government teacher. Government decides who gets what. And what we've been deciding for a very long time is the very wealthy and corporations get what they want, and the rest of us, well, we get the bird. That's the best I can come up with. We get the shaft, and the ALEC legislation, again, not new. This is stuff that the poison they've been pushing for a very long time. The right to work stuff that they've been pushing and has been passed in 26 states across this country. Pushing, for the whole free rider thing. That's still heavily on the agenda. Also, the fact that they want to have this. What I love is their language. Like right to work. Right to work sounds fabulous. We should all have a right to work, right? We should all have that right. When the reality is there's no rights. I think Dr. King said it best. There are no rights and there's no work. It's just a way to screw people out of their wages. They're also pushing this thing called the Paycheck Protection Act. This again, very deceitful, deceptive. Unions and members have a system set up, check off, where your dues come out of your paycheck every month. Mine does. It makes it so much easier for members to just go, hey, the first of every month, my dues are going to come out because, this Paycheck Protection Act, remember, they're protecting your paycheck. It would make it illegal for employers to do this. It would prohibit automatic deductions. Now, they're still going to allow like the United Way and for obviously the NRA or whatever. But your union, no. And what this is to do is it's to make unions go through the work of collecting dues. Also, they're pushing this thing called the Union Recertification Act because, unions don't have enough to do. Every year, they should have to go back and hold secret ballot elections to recertify the union every single year. And what we've found is in places where they've done this, overwhelmingly, unions maintain their elections. But it's not about that. It's about wasting dues dollars. It's about wasting workers' money on spinning their wheels, so that they're not taking those resources and going out and actually, you guessed it, organizing new workers. There is a new piece of ALEC poison, the Taxpayer Dollars Protect Workers Act. This was introduced back in 2023. It is model legislation that blacklists companies from voluntarily recognizing unions when they're getting money from the state. Georgia right now is pushing this through their legislature. So if, say, a EV battery plant is being built down in Georgia and the auto workers go down to that company and go, hey, you got an agreement with Ford or GM or any of them, recognize this and we'll start. The members, the workers want it. There can be labor peace. And the employer can recognize voluntarily. And the union and the company can come to an agreement voluntarily. Decide to work together. Don't have to butt heads. No. In places that pass this Taxpayer Dollars Protect Workers Act, that would be illegal. And remember, the party of smaller, less intrusive government, the party of, get your government out of my, whatever, they would put government right in between workers and their employer. Because, when you think labor peace, you think government right in the middle of it, especially right-wing government. And also, the final one that they're pushing through is this labor peace agreement that basically would prevent local governments from requiring employers to agree that they won't interfere in union elections. So under the guise of labor peace, they're saying, no, you have to go crush those unions. Let that sink in. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. And as always, thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.